Hi, this is Anil Bhartian. Welcome to another episode of TFiR Wrap. And today, once again, we have our co-host, Rob Hirschfeld. This time you were at a Gartner event. Tell us a bit about the event.
Gartner event is really focused on practitioners. This is, for people who aren't aware, Gartner is one of the huge industry analysts. So they have, a fleet of, or a flock, I guess, depending on the right term for a bunch of analysts. But they analyze the industry, they collect data. They're the ones who put out the magic quadrants and the hype cycles and things like that. And so this is one of their conferences that focuses on the people using infrastructure, doing operations in the cloud. And so it's a very practitioner-focused show, but it's not all people in cloud like the reInvent show or all people doing Kubernetes like the KubeCon show. It really is this cross-section of industry people who are actually doing the work. And so it's been fascinating to, one, interact with the people, but also see the messages that Gartner's giving them. And this is one of the things that's interesting about the Gartner Show, is it's as much about them listening to their customers in this perspective, the people using the tools, as it is about them giving out information.
What was the highlight for this year's show? Is it annual show? It just happens.
This is an annual show, and then it becomes a road show, and so they'll take it on. They'll take it to multiple continents after they're done. But most of the first pass content shows up here, and I've been to. This isn't the first show I've been to. I was 2 years ago. I was at the same show, 2017, and one of the things that's really changed here is that we are now looking at cloud in a much more assertive way. So this isn't a VMware show or a hyper-converged infrastructure show. This is a cloud digital transformation, get your automation, get your continuous integration, sort of disrupt yourselves or you're in trouble type of message. And so from that perspective, it's really changed dramatically in the last 2 years of how much the messaging and the readiness is for these corporate enterprises to move into a much more agile, much more cloud-focused environment. It's a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah, and if you look at analysts, Gartner, IDC, who you'll talk to, they have much more information because they get a lot of information under NDA as well, so they do know what's going on in the industry. What was the talk of the town this year? Because we have seen KubeCon, which was massive. Then we saw AWS. Before that, we saw VMware moving totally with Kubernetes. So talk us a bit about that.
It's interesting. Kubernetes is definitely a topic here, and it's important, but it's not the topic. This group is more interested in multi-cloud, automation, controls. Edge has been and I'm interested in Edge, so I go to a lot of those sessions, but there's quite a bit of topics about Edge. And then, we're going to do a special together on Outposts specifically, but this managed control plane, distributed control plane, SaaS control plane concept, where you own the infrastructure, but it's managed by somebody else, is definitely a major trend that we're seeing and a lot of people are talking about. And so, this idea of understanding your control plane, your management plane, and your data plane as separate things is very new for this year, and it's something that's really been fascinating for people to be aware of at the corporate level. The funny thing is, in the sessions, they do live surveys. It's a really nice technology where they're surveying the crowd live, and while there's a lot of vendors pushing managed control planes, the audience has been consistently saying, I'm not sure I'm ready for these, to give up access to my data center in that way. And so there's a little bit of a break between what the industry is putting together and what customers are asking for.
And that kind of contradicts what Amazon wanted. We did a show about that as well, data gravity or whatever the
data
term
gravity.
you use.
Yeah, that's what we're calling it now. That's right.
So yeah, there are a lot of customers who don't, they do know the value of data. I mean, the startups, they don't care, they just want to move fast. But that's one thing. Second thing is you also mentioned multi-cloud. But if you look at AWS or reInvent, it was more about my cloud, not multi-cloud.
Of course.
Yeah, so what do you see there happening with these three big players creating their own kind of silos of their own clouds?
This is the interesting thing. You know, the clouds individually are promoting and pushing their, you know, their ability. Actually, that's not true. Amazon is we can do everything. Come to us, we'll take care of you. It's great. Microsoft and Google have a much more multi-cloud sense, and they have to.
They have
Really
to, yeah.
they have to. It wouldn't be a very smart move to say we're the only cloud. And there are other right. Google and IBM are chasing these, and then there's
Yeah, I mean, they
a lot
have to
of
be. I mean, they
smaller
have to
service
enable
providers.
AWS customers to be able to use their cloud. So, I mean, everybody is on AWS, so they have to come up
Yeah.
with the multi-cloud strategy. That's the only way they can survive. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's exactly right. There is no doubt, and this conference sort of reinforces that Amazon sets the tempo that everybody else is marching to, and that's that's sort of how things go. The talks that I've seen, it's already clear that Outposts is sort of dominating the conversation, even though Microsoft and Google and a whole bunch of other vendors have stories in this space. But Amazon, can sort of change the narrative overnight from that perspective. And I have to give a hat tip to Gartner. While Outposts was announced last year, the flip to GA was a big deal, and I think surprised people. I think the odds makers were saying that Outposts would be another 6 months in coming. And so they've been able to respond very quickly to what's going on. The other trend lines that are really popping up quickly are AI ops, AI, machine learning, right? They're really helping people understand these topics, and they're really presenting those as much more established technologies than I was expecting them to. And so we're seeing a lot more of, yeah, you have monitoring, but you really need AI ML behind it. And these integrated offerings are really, really a big component for that. At the same time, this isn't an APM, application performance monitoring type of show, so that you don't see a lot of vendors. We're not talking about it that much. It's not the dev tooling platform. It's really much more about infrastructure, like walking the show floor. There are people selling racks and enclosures. There's data center companies, and actually even like the operating system booths are small. The cloud booths are small. Like Azure has, it's a relatively small footprint compared to some of the other vendors. But the SIs and the consultants have huge footprints here, right? That's a lot of the business that you're going to do.
When we think about AWS, we think of something, unique happening there, but that happens with every market. There is always one or two players. In most cases, one player that dominates. Every industry has that. No matter where you go, whether it's self-driving car or whatever it is. So I think AWS is just, it's not that hey, suddenly they are the one. No, every single industry has the same symptoms. There's one dominant player that sets the tone. If you look at IoT, or it has been there for so long. It actually earned a lot of bad, name because of the security implication. They say the SC in IoT stands for security, but now
Yeah.
it's kind of I won't say that it's kind of a resurrection, but Edge is actually giving it a totally different name and meaning to IoT platform. So where do you see Edge going now? Because there are a lot of open source projects. There are a lot of platforms that Microsoft is building with their Sphere OS. VMware and all those companies are doing some things. So I'm not talking the traditional consumer IoT space, or I'm not talking the traditional industrial IoT space where they put everything in containers or something like that. But what are the new spaces where you see Edge is going?
So the number one thing here, very clearly messaged, is video. Right. There's no doubt that video is driving a lot of the conversations. Every business, has video as a component to what they're doing. It's think about surveillance video, in-store video, right? There's all sorts of places for video, and so that really is a component for what people are thinking about here. But it's very real. The amount of sensor data, information, factory floor. Collecting all sorts of data from sensors is an exploding thing. The thing that's interesting to me on the IoT front is that while it's clearly a problem for the people here at the show and they know it, we aren't talking about gateways or aggregation points. It's very ephemeral. There's not a lot of tools, tech, magic quadrant type things being presented from an edge perspective. So while the show is really hitting edge, 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 you need to care about it. Hybrid cloud, clouds coming onto premises or coming into the edge. Those are huge themes. The practical, and this is the way you manage it, this is the way you control it, this is the way you deal with it, is not there. And so, we're sort of seeing a huge gap in market. I think this is why so many vendors are excited to talk about edge. And yet, the story of having a coherent set of infrastructure or applications to manage it is still gapped. An HCI edge story is, they were literally saying there isn't an HCI edge story, and yet they're not talking about how do you handle managing thousands of sites or even hundreds of sites. How do you distribute applications to stores where there's minimal connectivity? The use cases are actually really well documented, but the solutions in this space here are still missing.
One of the biggest challenges with IoT or edge is that it's very fragmented market. Companies come up with their own solutions, they spin something, and I was talking to folks from EdgeX Foundry project, and I talked to a lot of vendors, from the retail industry, and their biggest problem is they buy components from different vendors. They don't even have those API where they can talk to each other, so the cost goes higher. And sometimes most of these retailers, they live on thin margins, so they cannot afford to do that. So there are some projects like EdgeX Foundry where they're trying to bring a lot of open source projects together to kind of, so that you can mix and match, whatever you want and build the solution that you need. That is there for sure.
It's worth noting open source, right? I know it's near and dear to both of our hearts. And while open source is sort of mentioned here in passing, it's very innovative space and there's a lot of things that you should pay attention to in open source. It's not discussed in sort of as tangible a way. And that's one of the things that's interesting in a show like this is it is a vendored show. Gartner, because they're analyzing the industry, analyzes it based on vendors and vendor interactions and who's selling software. They don't traditionally, deal with individual software projects in quite the same mechanism because they don't have the same hook. And it's totally different than a lot of the open source shows that you would go to where that would be the main conversation. It's still an important trend, and I don't want to say that Gartner's not paying attention to it and the people here don't care, but it's not as directly seen as a thing that you would do as in say the KubeCon shows or something like that.
I was watching an interview or analysis piece on YouTube, and one of the things that came out with AWS was that Amazon was more or less telling the Kubernetes committee or CNCF that we can spin the feature that we need when we need it. You have to work with the whole community, and and that's actually true. You really cannot. Nobody can dictate whether it's Google or Microsoft, and that happens with every other product. Even if you look at Red Hat, that's why RHEL or SLE is developed in private, whereas Fedora and OpenSUSE are community-based product. What do you see there? Because you mentioned that the vendors don't. I mean, they might care as much as they should care, but that is not the bigger. So what do you think about that perspective?
I think that we have some really strong marketing that open source is fast and innovative and it disrupts the industry, and those things are true to an extent. I think people building with open source technologies can be fast and innovative, but a lot of these projects by themselves are not. They're committees. They're intentionally designed by multiple people coming together and working out their differences, and so one of the things that the industry needs to think through in how we position this is that for open source, commons software, those things we actually want to be hammered out slowly and thoughtfully and in ways where multiple points of view are considered, and that takes time. It's not something that moves as quickly. And I think when you look at what Amazon says and the way they operate their business, and this is true of everybody, it's not just Amazon, there are things where they're like, we see line of sight to customer need, we know how to build it, we have a team, we build it, we go. And then if it's interesting, we might open source it, or if it's related to open source, we might grab that and then build on top of that. That's where open source is really powerful and innovative. It's if you can shortcut a process because there's some community good. But it's a challenge. It's going to keep being a challenge, and we're going to keep talking about it. But at this show, it hasn't been as much of a problem. This show is people who pay for software, people who pay for hardware, and that's the audience.
But what I am curious about is that what are the projections that were there from Gartner, or what 2020 because things are moving so fast, it's actually hard to track of what will happen in December. We may be able to talk about what will happen in January. So can you talk about some of the predictions or projections that were made during the event, which caught your attention as usual?
I listen to analysts very carefully. It's almost a meta conversation to me when I think about the analysts, because it's important to understand, what their positions and opinions are, but it's also important to understand how they're forming those opinions and what's driving those forward. And I think the meta from that perspective is public cloud is the dominant cloud model. One thing I do feel and does come through in this show is a sense of urgency. And I think that the prediction I would make is the people who are not not making plans and feeling like they have to really attack this problem, pay down technical debt, disrupt their company's move into a much more automated infrastructure, right? Transform their IT thinking, are in trouble. And that's not picking a technology per se, but it is definitely the 2020 thing that I would expect, is that we're going to get analysts saying, yeah, hey, if you're not doing this now, you're a laggard, you're in trouble. And I think that's the next round of messaging here, is that you've got to be on top of it. You can't wait for it to happen. You can't hope things get easier before you do the hard work. Grab your shovel and dig in. That's a lot of what the message is, and I think for 2020, what they're going to be saying is, it's time. You're done. There's no more waiting.
That gives me an idea for one of our for the future show, and that is more or less because from RackN's perspective, because you actually help companies, that when there is this sense of urgency, what are the things? I mean, we know this is nothing new. We have seen this story played out all the way with digital transformation. People have so much technical debt, they just cannot move faster. But I want to talk to you in this session, and I would love to bring in some more guests also, if possible, to actually understand that what are the roadblocks that companies face. Because I don't think that they don't want to move. They do want to be able to move to this bandwagon and be on the cloud and move faster. But there are a lot of real challenges that are there, and then there are so many choices, and some choices are scary. So we can. I would love to talk about that. That what is that problem, and how you can actually help them solve those problems. Okay. Yes, there is a need for urgency, but what can they do? So
you're hitting exactly the right problem. There's urgency, and then there's trying to figure out how do I pull out the stops and make things move faster. And so it's a hard problem. Yeah, let's have a show on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob, once again, and look forward to seeing you again for the Outpost post.